Yeah. Cool. Christoph, sound clear?
Sorry, come again? I can't hear you.
Is the sound clear?
Yeah, all good. All good. Fire away. Emil, you guys had some thoughts, some thoughts around even around fear that you want to just kick off the conversation?
Yeah, I just want to say good morning to everybody. It's lovely to see some familiar faces. We're missing everybody, of course, and we're missing having our home group and missing everybody at church. And you know, the coffee, Athol, is just not the same, but we're making do. So yeah, so we're talking about coronavirus, and maybe there's a lot of questions out there, and there's so much in the media that people have a lot of information available about coronavirus and the effect that it has on the community. And I think it's quite topical with going back to school that people are asking a lot of questions about whether they should go back to school, on what's the risks, and so on. So we have given it some thought about what our opinion is, but I think that there are the scientific community out there, and especially the Pediatric Association, which has put some thoughts forward about that, and these thoughts which is on the World Health Organization. And then, of course, we have personal thoughts as well on the view of how God allows us to interact with this difficult situation. So I think what shall we do first? Shall we just give a brief overview? So yeah, I think the first thing I think Eleez can just chat to us about is about what the Pediatric Association viewpoint is on the coronavirus and on the threats about it.
Okay, so the South African Pediatric Association is an association that represents all the pediatricians in South Africa. And they put forward a statement, and they said that they are in favor of children returning to school. They feel that the benefit for going back to school far outweighs any risks. One of the things that they state, and I can actually post their 4-page document on the website for the church if you'd like to read it, but is the fact that children are far less likely to get the virus than adults, and that if they do get the virus,
We've lost them there a little bit.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was losing, or I was lost, or whether they were lost.
No, I think
let's see if we can pick them up. I'll pick up the conversation just so long. I mean, Eleez and Emil shared this with me in the week, but basically, yeah, part of the recommendation from the Pediatric Society is that actually, you know, the medical risk to children is very low, and that they often carry, you know, the child's exposure to and the viral load and all of these things. I don't have all the medical terms, but basically they're saying they are super in favor of kids returning to school, just for the overall wellness of society and the developmental goals being reached for children. We've got to realize probably many children in our church community would have had online schooling at this time. But however, the national average is, I think, like that only 20% or 15% of kids would have had access to that kind of thing. So think of that 80% or 85% of kids were stuck at home doing nothing, kicking a ball down the street maybe, or irritating their parents, or whatever they would do. So we got to keep that in mind. Of course, there's a bigger question, and that's the thing around fear, because you may think, okay, that it's, you know, medically it's fine, but in my heart, am I ready for this? Actually, Marguerite and I had a quick conversation around that last night. You know, Adrian is grade R this year. Are we ready to send him to school? What, in 3 weeks' time, or whenever they're going back? And there's that element of, oh dear, what if he gets sick? Or, you know, but actually the thing to fear is not the virus. The thing to fear is God. We fear God more than, and we know that He is more powerful than anything else. Yeah, Emil and Eleez are not back up, are they?
Yeah, they're back here now. They're back.
Oh, great.
So I don't know what happened there. Great. So basically,
you cut off, Eleez. You cut off right in the beginning of whatever you were saying, just after you kind of said they're in favor of us going back.
Oh, okay. Well, so basically, if children get the virus, firstly, they're less likely to get the virus. And then secondly, if they get the virus, they're far less likely to get it severely, to get a severe illness. So their risk for being sick in the first place, or even getting severely sick, is very low. So, which is an encouraging thing. And as you were saying, Christoph, there are very few kids are online, only 20% of the population, if that. And then the quality of education online is obviously not the same as actually being in front of the teacher. Well, it may vary. So I think that for me, one of the things that I've seen a lot of in my practice is mental illness, and in adults and in children. It's been really dramatic to see the increase in this in the last few weeks with this whole COVID. And I think it's very important for children to return to normality, whether they're going back to their homeschooling or schooling at a government school or private school, wherever they are schooling, but for them to return to their routine will help significantly with bringing down fear and those kind of things. So for parents to talk to their children about what have they heard about the virus, what are their concerns about it, and then to actually speak it out with the child. Often the child has heard something and it's really gripped them with fear, but just to talk about that. And then obviously,
sorry, Elise, I love that, the emotional accompaniment of our children. I realize even with little kids like mine, they hear little things, don't have any context for that, and that goes really deep inside their hearts. I mean, I'll give an example. Some of you may know that Tando's mother passed away this week, which is really sad. Now, I'm needing to explain it to my kids. And the first thing that Emmanuel asked me was Tando's mother did she also die on a cross? So they just get a snippet of information. It's completely, they don't have a context for what do I even do with it, and they don't know how do I process that. What does that mean for me? Am I also going to die on a cross? And there's something of that even with this corona, that if we don't accompany our children through this emotionally, there's a whole new can of worms that opens up.
Yeah, I got another question quickly off Facebook, just while you're on the same topic about kids, is what about transmission to adults from kids? They might not be very sick, but adults can get it from them.
Yeah, so I think that's important. One of the things to remember is that the people who have died from the virus are generally the elderly, people with heart disease, diabetes, obesity, or so those are the main things. So or HIV related. The point being that when children come home, they may not be ill, but if there's somebody who's over the age of 60, or if they've got a chronic illness, not asthma, does not increase the risk. A lot of people ask that question. But if they've got one of the ones that are at risk, then they call it shielding. So what we would like to do is actually to allow our population to get the virus as they go back into the communities, but the younger population. And what we need to do is to shield the elderly, and those with chronic illnesses. And if we can shield them, so if the child's been to school, obviously if granny lives at home, not to have close contact with granny, to wear the mask, to make sure that he washes and sanitizes his hands and changes his clothes when he arrives home, that he's not sharing eating utensils and towels with the elderly person. So we want to actually shield the elderly, and if possible for elderly people in our community to work from home or to have meetings from home, that we help them and support them and connect with them emotionally, but rather not in close contact, rather through the internet, or just not going too near them.
Yeah, so one of the things that's out in the news is that whether children are super spreaders of the infection. And there's been studies, Iceland, Australia, Germany, France, and so on, which has shown that they're not super spreaders. In fact, they think that children are less likely to get infected. I think the risk with schools are actually teachers that are over the age of 50 with the risk factors. Those are 60, 50, it depends on what you read and who you read. Yeah. But the older the age of the person, and the risk factors associated, that's where the risk come in. So I think the fear is there. They've described a syndrome which is called Kawasaki syndrome. The problem with that is if you get a huge population that get infected, there may be a small percentage of people that get complications, but you're only going to hear about that in the news. So it's misconstrued. So you're going to hear of all the worst case scenario, which is true, but that's just because there hasn't been a time in our generation that so many people or children get infected with the same virus at the same time. So it is kind of like an artificial situation, but it is still a dangerous situation for those who get infected and they develop the complication. So the context is quite different to what we've seen in the past. So it is pretty much comparing apples and pears, but you have to deal with what you have at the moment. I think another thought as well, which the World Health Organization described, is that in Africa, the collateral damage from COVID, not the disease, the virus, but the effect that it has on the community are probably going to be worse than the infection itself. And you have to balance this in the context of what we are and who we are. And that's the difficulty. I think the other concept as well is we've never seen something like this and it hasn't been studied, and it's unknown. And I think unknown brings a lot of fear. But what we know is we know God, and God has dealt with every situation that are similar. The Bible says there's nothing that has happened that has not happened in the past. God has seen everything. He knows everything that will happen, and he knows how to deal with it. And I think the one thing in our hearts is we may encounter an unknown, but God is known. God has seen it. God knows how to deal with it. And he is going to get us through whatever we may encounter. Also our fears of what the unknown or may hold in a situation like this.
Yeah, I love that. Of course, there's this massive narrative around fear. And it's like you say, it's hyped up. It's what you see you don't see the normal reporting is not neutral. Let's just say that news is not neutral, and there's always the tendency to exaggerate something that is contentious or something that is on the negative side because it's more newsworthy. And I feel that narrative is unfortunate. How do we counter that narrative, even in making real practical decisions around our kids going back to school? And how do we come against that narrative?
So the first thing is, as a medical practitioner, you may ask me, do I send my child back to school? And as a medical practitioner, I would say, look at the numbers. But as a believer, I think it's an issue of faith. You need to hear from God what God is saying in your own context. And therefore, as a church community, what do we recommend? Do we recommend sending your children back to school? And that is a very personal choice that a person has to make. And we cannot say, do this or do that. You have to, for example, if we say, well, send your child back to school, and that is the one family that something happens and a child get infected and blah, 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 the whole thing just goes out of proportion, then the accountability is not ours. Every person has to make that decision for themselves. And I think that's the first important thing when we decide to send our children back to school. We are quite comfortable to send our children back to school because we think there's more advantage to send them back to school than hold them back at home. But that is a personal choice. And I think everybody has to make that personal choice with faith in their heart. If a person is not sure about this, I think the best place is to get before God and to get peace. We had such a beautiful story, Trian's story about be still before God. And I think that is a good message for this time, is to be still before God and let God speak and hear from him what he's saying. What do you feel?
Yeah. For me, I agree. Everyone must hear from God, but the evidence is there. The South African Pediatric Association recommends that children return to school, that the risk is minimal, that the benefits of schooling far outweigh any of that minimal risk. Yes, but it is obviously your decision that you need to make. And then just from a point of view of what can you do to keep yourself healthy and your children healthy. So obviously the government has told us all about social distancing and to wear your mask, to sanitize your hands, wash hands, those things. But it's very important to make sure that our kids are getting good sleep every night. Sleep is very important for immunity, as is exercise. Exercise is very helpful for managing stress and anxiety, and also for stimulating our immune systems to be strong. And then obviously one very important thing as well, and Jen I'm sure she would tell us that as well, is about the importance of healthy eating. To cut sugar in this season and to eat real food, plenty of salad and veg and those kind of things.
Oranges.
Yes. Anyway, but just simple things that you can do, and to manage stress, because stress really runs your immunity down, which is, as we said, talking to one another, but also just about a mindset. I really had this picture of how God wants us to change the lens that we're looking at this whole thing through. And that when people look from a lens of fear, that obviously affects our faith and it runs us down emotionally. But if we look from a lens of faith and looking from the lens of overcoming in Christ, you know, then it does change. They've looked at studies which looked at people who had hope. A person who is hopeful's immunity is far stronger than someone who is in a state of hopelessness. So it's important for us to find hope in God and that our hope is with him. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that integrated approach. I mean, so basically, if we want to boost our immune system, spend some more time with Jesus and make sure you go for your run and get enough sleep. And it's such an integrated spirituality. I love that because I see some of that in my own life. You know, if I don't go for my run every now and then, I get real grumpy at home. And actually, I need to just be booted out the house for half an hour and then I'm a better person afterwards. But even medically, you know, that can be shown is when we have our radar on God. When Psalm 46 maybe is a good one for us to have a look at as a church this week. Why don't we do a little Bible study in your home group on that? That's the one that Trian mentioned about be still and know that I'm God. You know, and let's get let's set our sights on Jesus in a special way in these next few weeks. Even you know, even when we have to make big calls like around sending our kids to school, all these things, let's set our sights on Jesus so that he can direct our hearts and help us to stay strong. Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. Anything else there, Emil?
Yeah, I think the context of what the message that we get from the government every day is stay home, stay safe. And I think the context of the stay home was to curb the spread, that we dampen the curve. And I think one of the things that people have started believing is that you actually that people are not going to get the virus if we stay at home and nobody will be infected. But the reality is that it was to curb the spread, the rapid spread. And not getting the infection is I say to my house, even if no pestilence will visit our house in the first place, but even like Daniel's friends, when they were in the fire, even if the virus visit our house, even if that should happen, unthinkable as it may be, God is with us. Even if we're in the fire, God is gonna hold us. And I think for me, that is my attitude, is like, God, you're gonna keep pestilence from our house, but even if this virus visits our house, you are still gonna protect us. And even when we are in the fire, you will be there with us. And you're going to keep us from harm. And even if that doesn't happen, I still trust in God, and he's still our protector, and he's still faithful.
That's become very, very real to me, this thing of that message of stay home, stay safe versus the reality that 70% of our country is going to get the virus. It's just a question of when. And that actually it kind of changes the goalposts from being a complete lockdown mindset of let me not get out the house to rather saying, how can I try and resume a sense of a normal life just with some extra measures in place to try and make sure that we don't all get the virus in the next 2 weeks. You know, it's kind of a change of focus. And if we see it like that, I mean, the reality is we cannot be indoors and locked in for the next 2 years. And even if we could, then we're going to be really susceptible to the next round of the virus coming around, whenever that comes. You know. It's like a lose-lose situation if you go that route. Whereas if we accept that, probably many people are going to get sick, but if we stay safe and we have a strong immune system, the damage is not going to be so big. It's actually healthier to go forward in a cautious way.
Yeah, that's true. I think the message is just to protect the old people. Don't unnecessarily expose old people. But if the young people get it, the likelihood is that most people will have a mild infection. I've spoken to people who's had the infection. Most people just had mild infections. There's been 1 or 2 people that's been seriously ill with it. And that is the reality, is some people will get seriously ill, but the majority of people will have a mild infection. And that doesn't negate the seriousness of the situation. It just contextualizes the situation. I think you've done it very well when you spoke earlier about that as well. So I think for us, it is, yes, the precautions are very good, and it helps to prevent other diseases as well as gastroenteritis. And so it's just good practices in some cases. But the heart behind it is we are not fearful of disease because Jesus overcome on the cross, and he will take us through whatever may come against us. He's my lighthouse.
Awesome. Awesome. Shall we just have a quick final word on church gatherings, just an update on what we feel in the season? Last week, of course, we made the announcement that we are not going to meet as a church this Sunday because the school has not allowed us. The Department of Basic Education has said that schools may not rent out their property, so we can in no way gather at the school. But we've been mulling around with the idea of, can we meet as home groups in some way? Can we meet for prayer meetings and that kind of thing? Emil, do you want to just update people on what we are thinking?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Once again, we would probably recommend that the elderly should avoid meetings, especially where there's a risk of getting infected or being exposed to people with infections. For younger people to meet, there has to be precautions, have to wear masks, have to wash hands, social distancing. It means no hugging, no kissing. And so that is very difficult in a church community, no hugging. But unfortunately,
no coffee.
Those are, I think if you have coffee, take a takeaway cup and have it and take your takeaway cup with you. But so there can be practical measures that's in there. If you meet outside, say you have a deck or an outside garden, probably safer to meet that way. If you want to respect the goalposts that the government regulations has posted, so I think we have to respect that. And but I think we probably going to need to meet in smaller groups and just work out what that looks like. So I think that's something we'll be working out in the next couple of weeks, what it looks like and where and how one should be meeting. So I think, yeah, just keep that option open.
Yeah, I think just to fill everybody in from my side also. So I have a lot of faith that there is something that God wants to restore to us as a church in this time in terms of interpersonal contact. We are just not 100% sure yet what is the wisest way. What we do know definitely that the church office at the Citadel has opened again. We are allowed to open, we are allowed to do counseling, we're allowed to see people one-on-one as elders. And we want to see if it's possible to get our home group leaders also given some permission letters or some kind, so that we can have one-on-one contact and pray for one another, whether it's at the church office or at someone's home. Not as a social gathering, but really to pray and to encourage one another and to stir up one another in the faith. Whether we can expand that into larger meetings where, let's say, we've got 3 or 4 people or 5 coming over to a home or to a garden and praying together as a church meeting, that we're not just 100% sure about just yet. The practical things that are gazetted in terms of cleaning things and all of that is quite onerous. So they've made it really hard to do if you want to follow the letter of the law. So the government still encourages us to meet online, and that will be our kind of primary way of ministering. But I do trust that there's some measure of greater connection that we can have in this time somehow, somewhere.
Yeah, I would also just encourage leaders, if they want to host meetings and so on, just to get permission through the church, just that it's on record, and you have to keep a list of the names of people that are meeting. And so there are some regulations to that. And I think that if you do host a meeting, just to make sure that just follow the right and so on, out of respect for the current regulations as well.
Awesome. Sean, shall we wrap it up there?
Yeah, that's good, guys. So yeah, I think thank you to everyone for joining us. You won't see my face again, but you'll see these 2 beautiful faces. 3 beautiful faces, should I say. Who's the odd one out there? But yeah, if you guys do have any questions, if anyone has any questions, please send them through to us. We would love to chat. Give us a call. If you know anyone that is in need of counseling in any way at the moment, and it's desperate, we are open at the Citadel. If you're a leader, please speak to us around the measures that you have to take in those meetings, and then we can get letters and all sorts, and yeah, open up the new chapter of church. So thank you, everyone, and we shall see you again soon.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cheers.
Yeah.